Chapter 30. A voice and a shush. I have seen stranger couples. Wait, no I haven't. Turns out that was a bad idea. Raina and Meg moved cautiously, as one does when approaching a cornered wild animal or an angry immortal. They took up positions on either side of Harpocrates, raised their blades above the fascists, and mouthed in unison. 1, 2, 3. It was almost like the fascists had been waiting to explode, despite Raina's earlier protestations that Imperial gold blades might take forever to hack through Imperial gold chains. Her sword and Meg's cut through the cords and cables as if they were nothing but illusions themselves. Their blades hit the fascists and shattered them, sending bundles of rods blasting into splinters, shafts breaking golden crescents toppling to the floor. The girls stepped back, clearly surprised by their own success. Harpocrates gave me a thin, cruel smile. Without a sound, the fetters on his hands and feet cracked and fell away like spring ice. The remaining cables and chains shriveled and blackened, curling against the walls. Harpocrates stretched out his free hand, the one that was not gesturing. Shh! I'm about to kill you. And the 2 golden axe blades from the broken fascists flew into his grip. His fingers turned white hot, the blades melted, gold dribbling through his fingers and pooling beneath him. A small, terrified voice in my head said, "Well, this is going great." The god plucked the glass jar from his lap. He raised it on his fingertips like a crystal ball. For a moment I was afraid he would give it the gold axe treatment, melting whatever remained of the Sibyl just to spite me. Instead he assaulted my mind with new images. I saw a Eurynomus lope into Harpocrates' prison, the glass jar tucked under one arm, the ghoul's mouth slavered, its eyes glowed purple. Harpocrates thrashed in his chains. It seemed he had not been in the box very long at that point. He wanted to crush that Eurynomus with silence, but the ghoul seemed unaffected. Its body was being driven by another mind, far away in the tyrant's tomb. Even through telepathy, it was clear the voice was Tarquin's, heavy and brutal as chariot wheels over flesh. "I brought you a friend," he said. "Try not to break her." He tossed the jar to Harpocrates, who caught it out of surprise. Tarquin's possessed ghoul limped away, chuckling evilly, and chained the doors behind it. Alone in the dark, Harpocrates' first thought was to smash the jar. Anything from Tarquin had to be a trap, or poison, or something worse. But he was curious. A friend? Harpocrates had never had one of those. He wasn't sure he understood the concept. He could sense a living force inside the jar, weak, sad, fading, but alive, and possibly more ancient than he was. He opened the lid. The faintest voice began to speak to him, cutting straight through his silence as if it didn't exist. After so many millennia, Harpocrates, the silent god, who was never supposed to exist, had almost forgotten sound. He wept with joy. The god and the Sibyl began to converse. They both knew they were pawns, prisoners. They were only here because they served some purpose for the emperors and their new ally, Tarquin. Like Harpocrates, the Sibyl had refused to cooperate with her captors. She would tell them nothing of the future. Why should she? She was beyond pain and suffering. She had literally nothing left to lose and longed only to die. Harpocrates shared the feeling. He was tired of spending millennia, slowly wasting away, waiting until he was obscure enough, forgotten by all humankind, so he could cease to exist altogether. His life had always been bitter, a never-ending parade of disappointments, bullying and ridicule. Now he wanted sleep, the eternal sleep of extinct gods. They shared stories. They bonded over their hatred of me. They realized that Tarquin wanted this to happen. He had thrown them together, hoping they'd become friends, so he could use them as leverage against each other. But they couldn't help their feelings. Wait, I interrupted Harpocrates' story. Are you two together? I shouldn't have asked. I didn't mean to send such an incredulous thought. Like, how does a god fall in love with a voice in a glass jar? Harpocrates' rage pressed down on me, making my knees buckle. The air pressure increased, as if I'd plummeted 1,000 feet. I almost blacked out, but I guessed Harpocrates wouldn't let that happen. He wanted me conscious, able to suffer. He flooded me with bitterness and hate. My joints began to unknit, my vocal cords dissolving. Harpocrates might have been ready to die, but that didn't mean he wouldn't kill me first. That would bring him great satisfaction. I bowed my head, gritting my teeth against the inevitable. Fine, I thought, I deserve it. Just spare my friends, please. The pressure eased. I glanced up through a haze of pain. In front of me, Raina and Meg stood shoulder to shoulder, facing down the god. They sent him their own flurry of images. Raina pictured me singing the fall of Jason Grace to the Legion, officiating at Jason's funeral pyre with tears in my eyes, then looking goofy and awkward and clueless as I offered to be her boyfriend, giving her the best, most cleansing laugh she'd had in years. Thanks, Raina. Meg pictured the way I'd saved her in the Myrmeek's lair at Camp Half-Blood, singing about my romantic failures with such honesty it rendered giant ants catatonic with depression. She envisioned my kindness to Livia, the elephant, to Crest, and especially to her when I'd given her a hug in our room at the cafe and told her I would never give up trying. In all their memories, I looked so human, but in the best possible ways. Without words, my friends asked Harpocrates if I was still the person he hated so much. The god scowled, considering the two young women. Then a small voice actually spoke from inside the sealed glass jar. Enough. As faint and muffled as her voice was, I should not have been able to hear it. Only the utter silence of the shipping container made her audible, though how she cut through Harpocrates' dampening field I had no idea. It was definitely the Sibyl. I recognised her defiant tone, the same way she'd sounded centuries before, when she vowed never to love me until every grain of sand ran out. Come back to me at the end of that time, then if you still want me, I'm yours. Now, here we were, at the wrong end of forever, neither of us in the right form to choose the other. Harpocrates regarded the jar, his expression turning sad and plaintive. He seemed to ask, "Are you sure?" "This is what I have foreseen," whispered the Sibyl. "At last, we will rest." A new image appeared in my mind, verses from the Sibylline books, purple letters against white skin, so bright it made me squint. The words smoked as if fresh from a harpy tattoo artist's needle. Add the last breath of the god who speaks not. Once his soul is cut free, together with the shattered glass. Harpocrates must have seen the words too, judging from the way he winced. I waited for him to process their meaning, to get angry again, to decide that if anyone's soul should be cut free, it should be mine. When I was a god, I rarely thought about the passage of time. A few centuries here or there, what did it matter? Now I considered just how long ago the Sibyl had written those lines. They had been scribbled into the original Sibylline books, when Rome was still a puny kingdom. Had the Sibyl known, even then, what they meant? Had she realised she would end up as nothing but a voice in a jar, stuck in this dark metal box with her boyfriend, who smelled like roses and looked like a withered 10-year-old in a toga and a bowling pin crown? If so, how could she not want to kill me, even more than Harpocrates did? The god peered into the container, maybe having a private telepathic conversation with his beloved Sibyl. Raina and Meg shifted, doing their best to block me from the god's line of sight. Perhaps they thought that if he couldn't see me, he might forget I was there. I felt awkward peeking around their legs, but I was so drained and light-headed I doubted I could stand. No matter what images Harpocrates had shown me, or how weary he was of life, I couldn't imagine he would just roll over and surrender. "Oh, you need to kill me for your prophecy thingy. Okay, sure, stab me right here." I definitely couldn't imagine him letting us take the Sibyl's jar and shattering it for our summoning ritual. They had found love. Why would they want to die? Finally, Harpocrates nodded, as if they'd come to an agreement. His face tightening with concentration, he pulled his index finger from his mouth, lifted the jar to his lips and gave it a gentle kiss. Normally, I would not have been moved by a man caressing a jar, but the gesture was so sad and heartfelt that a lump formed in my throat. He twisted off the lid. "Goodbye, Apollo," said the Sibyl's voice, clearer now. "I forgive you, not because you deserve it, not for your sake at all, but because I will not go into oblivion carrying hate when I can carry love." Even if I could have spoken, I wouldn't have known what to say. I was in shock. Her tone asked for no reply, no apology. She didn't need or want anything from me. It was almost as if I were the one being erased. Harpocrates met my gaze. Resentment still smouldered in his eyes, but I could tell he was trying to let it go. The effort seemed even harder for him than keeping his hand from his mouth. Without meaning to, I asked, "Why are you doing this? How can you just agree to die?" It was in my interest that he did so, sure, but it made no sense. He had found another soul to live for. Besides, too many other people had already sacrificed themselves for my quests. I understood now, better than I ever had, why dying was sometimes necessary. As a mortal, I had made that choice just a few minutes ago in order to save my friends, but a god agreeing to cease his existence, especially when he was free and in love. No, I couldn't comprehend that. Harpocrates gave me a dry smirk. My confusion, my sense of near panic, must have given him what he needed to finally stop being angry at me. Of the two of us, he was the wiser god. He understood something I did not. He certainly wasn't going to give me my answers. The soundless god sent me one last image. Me at an altar, making a sacrifice to the heavens. I interpreted that as an order. Make this worth it. Don't fail. Then he exhaled deeply. We watched, stunned, as he began to crumble, his face cracking, his crown collapsing like a sandcastle turret. His last breath, a silver glimmer of fading life force, swirled into the glass jar to be with the Sibyl. He had just enough time to twist the lid closed before his arms and chest turned to chunks of dust, and then Harpocrates was gone. Raina lunged forward, catching the jar before it could hit the floor. "That was close," she said, which was how I realised the god's silence had been broken. Everything seemed too loud. My own breathing, the sizzle of severed electric wires, the creaking of the container's walls in the wind. Meg still had the skin tone of a legume. She stared at the jar in Rayna's hand, as if worried it might explode. Are they? I think. I choked on my words. I dabbed my face and found my cheeks were wet. I think they're gone. Permanently. Harpocrates' last breath is all that remains in the jar now. Rayna peered through the glass. But the Sybil. She turned to face me and almost dropped the jar. My gods, Apollo, you look terrible. A horror show, yes, I remember. No, I mean it's worse now. The infection. When did that happen? Meg squinted at my face. Oh, yuck. We got to get you healed quick. I was glad I didn't have a mirror or a phone camera to see how I looked. I could only assume the lines of purple infection had made their way up my neck and were now drawing fun new patterns on my cheeks. I didn't feel any more zombie-ish. My stomach wound didn't throb any worse than before, but that could have simply meant my nervous system was shutting down. Help me up, please, I said. It took both of them to do so. In the process, I put one hand on the floor to brace myself amid the shattered fascist rods and got a splinter in my palm. Of course I did. I wobbled on spongy legs, leaning on Rayna, then on Meg, trying to remember how to stand. I didn't want to look at the glass jar, but I couldn't help it. There was no sign of Harpocrates' silvery life force inside. I had to have faith that his last breath was still there. Either that, or when we tried to do our summoning, I would discover that he had played a terrible final joke on me. As for the Sybil, I couldn't sense her presence. I was sure her final grain of sand had slipped away. She had chosen to exit the universe with Harpocrates, one last shared experience between two unlikely lovers. On the outside of the jar, the gluey remains of a paper label clung to the glass. I could just make out the faded words, Smucker's Grape. Tarquin and the Emperors had much to answer for. How could they? Rayna shivered. Can a god do that, just choose to stop existing? I wanted to say gods can do anything, but the truth was I didn't know. The bigger question was, why would a god even want to try? When Harpocrates had given me that last dry smile, had he been hinting that someday I might understand? Someday would even the Olympians be forgotten relics, yearning for non-existence? I used my nails to pull the splinter from my palm. Blood pooled, regular red human blood. It ran down the groove of my lifeline, which was not a great omen. Good thing I didn't believe in such things. We need to get back, Rayna said. Can you move? Shh, Meg interrupted, putting a finger to her lips. I feared she was doing the most inappropriate Harpocrates impersonation ever. Then I realised she was quite serious. My newly sensitive ears picked up on what she was hearing. The faint, distant cries of angry birds. The ravens were returning. Chapter 31. Oh, blood moon rising. Take a rain check on Doomsday. I'm stuck in traffic. We emerged from the shipping container just in time to get dive-bombed. A raven swooped past Rayna and bit a chunk out of her hair. Ow, she yelled. All right, that's it. Hold this. She shoved the glass jar into my hands, then readied her sword. A second raven came within range and she slashed it out of the sky. Meg's twin blades whirled, mixing another bird into a black cloud. That left only 30 or 40 more bloodthirsty hang gliders of doom swarming the tower. Anger swelled in me. I decided I was done with the raven's bitterness. Plenty of folks had valid reasons to hate me. Harpocrates, the Sybil, Coronis, Daphne, maybe a few dozen others. Okay, maybe a few hundred others. But the ravens? They were thriving. They'd grown gigantic. They loved their new job as flesh-eating killers. Enough with the blame. I secured the glass jar in my backpack. Then I unslung the bow from my shoulder. Scram or die, I yelled at the birds. You get one warning. The ravens cawed and croaked with derision. One dived at me and got an arrow between the eyes. It spiraled downward, shredding a funnel cloud of feathers. I picked another target and shot it down, then a third and a fourth. The ravens' caws became cries of alarm. They widened their circle, probably thinking they could get out of range. I proved them wrong. I kept shooting until 10 were dead, then a dozen. I brought extra arrows today, I shouted. Who wants the next one? At last, the birds got the message. With a few parting screeches, probably unprintable comments about my parentage, they broke off their assault and flew north towards Marin County. Nice work, Meg told me, retracting her blades. The best I could manage was a nod and some wheezing. Beads of sweat froze on my forehead. My legs felt like soggy French fries. I didn't see how I could climb back down the ladder, much less race off for a fun-filled evening of god summoning, combat to the death and possibly turning into a zombie. Oh gods! Rayna stared in the direction the flock had gone, her fingers absently exploring her scalp where the raven had ripped off a hank of her hair. It'll grow back, I said. What? No, not my hair. Look! She pointed to the Golden Gate Bridge. We must have been inside the shipping container much longer than I'd realised. The sun sat low in the western sky. The daytime full moon had risen above Mount Tamalpais. The afternoon heat had turned away and burned away all the fog, giving us a perfect view of the White Fleet. 50 beautiful yachts in V formation, gliding leisurely past Point Bonita Lighthouse at the edge of the Marin Headlands, making their way towards the bridge. Once past it, they would have a smooth sailing into the San Francisco Bay. My mouth tasted like god dust. How long do we have? Rayner checked her watch. The Vapay are taking their time, but even at this rate, they're sailing. They'll be in position to fire on the camp by sunset. Maybe 2 hours? Under different circumstances, I might have enjoyed her use of the term Vapay. It had been a long time since I'd heard someone call their enemies spoiled wines. In modern parlance, the closest meaning would have been scumbags. How long will it take for us to reach camp? I asked. In Friday afternoon traffic, Rayner calculated, a little more than 2 hours. From one of her gardening belt pouches, Meg pulled a fistful of seeds. I guess we'd better hurry then. I was not familiar with Jack and the Beanstalk. It didn't sound like a proper Greek myth. When Meg said we'd have to use a Jack and the Beanstalk exit, I didn't have a clue what she meant, even as she scattered handfuls of seeds down the nearest pylon, causing them to explode into bloom until she'd formed a latticework of plant matter all the way to the ground. Over to you. Over you go, she ordered. But you're in no shape to climb the ladder, she said. This'll be faster, like falling, only with plants. I hated that description. Rayner just shrugged. What the heck? She kicked one leg over the railing and jumped. The plants grabbed her, passing her down the leafy latticework a few feet at a time like a bucket brigade. At first, she yelped and flailed her arms, but about halfway to the ground she shouted up to us, "Not that bad." I went next. It was bad. I screamed. I got flipped upside down. I floundered for something to hold on to, but I was completely at the mercy of creepers and ferns. It was like free-falling through a skyscraper-sized bag of leaves, if those leaves were still alive and very touchy-feely. At the bottom, the plants set me down gently on the grass next to Rayner, who looked like she'd been tarred and floured. Meg landed beside us and immediately crumpled into my arms. "Lot of plants," she muttered. Her eyes rolled up in her head. She began to snore. I guess she would not be jacking any more beanstalks today. Aurum and Argentum bounded over, wagging their tails and yapping. The hundreds of black feathers strewn around the parking lot told me the greyhounds had been having fun with the birds I'd shot out of the sky. I was in no condition to walk, much less carry Meg, but somehow, dragging her between us, Rayner and I managed to stumble back down the hillside to the truck. I suspected Rayner was using her Bologna amazing skills to lend me some of her strength, though I doubted she had much left to spare. When we reached the Chevy, Rayner whistled. Her dogs jumped into the back. We wrestled our unconscious beanstalk master into the middle of the bench seat, and I collapsed next to her. Rayner cranked the ignition, and we tore off down the hill. Our progress was great for about 90 seconds. Then we hit the Castro district and got stuck in Friday traffic, funneling towards the highway. It was almost enough to make me wish for another bucket brigade of plants that could toss us back to Oakland. After our time with Harpocrates, everything seemed obscenely loud. The Chevy's engine, the chatter of passing pedestrians, the thrum of subwoofers from other cars. I cradled my backpack, trying to take comfort in the fact that the glass jar was intact. We had got what we came for, though I could hardly believe the Sibyl and Harpocrates were gone. I would have to process my shock and grief later, assuming I lived. I needed to figure out a way to properly honour their passing. How did one commemorate the death of a god of silence? A moment of silence seemed superfluous. Perhaps a moment of screaming. First things first, survive tonight's battle. Then I would figure out the screaming. Rayner must have noticed my worried expression. "You did good back there," she said. "You stepped up." Rayner sounded sincere, but her praise just made me feel more ashamed. "I'm holding the last breath of a god I bullied," I said miserably. "In the jar of a Sibyl I cursed, who were protected by birds I turned into killing machines after they tattled about my cheating girlfriend, whom I subsequently had assassinated." "All true," Rayner said, "but the thing is, you recognise it now. It feels horrible." She gave me a thin smile. "That's kind of the point. You do something evil, you feel bad about it, you do better. That's a sign you might be developing a conscience." I tried to remember which of the gods had created the human conscience. Had we created it, or had humans just developed it on their own? Giving mortals a sense of decency didn't seem like the sort of thing a god would brag about on their profile page. I appreciate what you're saying," I managed, "but my past mistakes almost got you and Meg killed. If Harpocrates had destroyed you when you were trying to protect me." The idea was too awful to contemplate. My shiny new conscience would have blown up inside me like a grenade. Rayner gave me a brief pat on the shoulder. All we did was show Harpocrates how much you've changed. He recognised it. Have you completely made up for all the bad things you've done? No. But you keep adding to the good things column. That's all of us can, or all any of us can do. Adding to the good things column. Rayner spoke of this superpower as if it were one I could actually possess. Thank you, I said. She studied my face with concern, probably noting how far the purple vines of infection had wriggled their way across my cheeks. You can thank me by staying alive, okay? We need you for that summoning ritual. As we climbed the entrance ramp to Interstate 80, I caught glimpses of the bay beyond the downtown skyline. The yachts had now slipped under the Golden Gate Bridge. Apparently the cutting of Harpocrates' cords and the destruction of the fascists hadn't deterred the emperors at all. Stretching out in front of the big vessels were silver wake lines from dozens of smaller boats making their way toward the East Bay shoreline. Landing parties, I guessed. And those boats were moving a whole lot faster than we were. Over Mount Tam, the full moon rose, slowly turning the colour of Dakota's fruit punch. Meanwhile, Aurum and Argentum barked cheerfully in the back of the truck. Rayner drummed her fingers on the steering wheel and murmured, "Vamonos, vamonos." Meg leaned against me, snoring and drooling on my shirt, because she loved me so much. We were inching our way onto the Bay Bridge when Rayner finally said, "I can't stand this. The ship shouldn't have made it past the Golden Gate." "What do you mean?" I asked. "Open the glove compartment, please. Should be a scroll inside." I hesitated. Who knew what sort of dangers might lurk in the glove compartment of a Praetor's pickup truck? Cautiously, I rummaged past her insurance documents, a few packages of tissues, some bags of dog treats. This? I held up a floppy cylinder of vellum. "Yeah. Unroll it and see if it works." "You mean it's a communication scroll?" She nodded. "I'd do it myself, but it's dangerous to drive and scroll." Okay. I spread the vellum across my lap. Its surface appeared blank. Nothing happened. I wondered if I was supposed to say some magic words or give it a credit card number or something. Then, above the scroll, a faint ball of light flickered, slowly resolving into a miniature holographic Frank Zhang. "Whoa!" Tiny Frank nearly jumped out of his tiny armour. "Apollo?" "Hi," I said. Then to Rayner, "It works." "I see that," she said. "Frank, can you hear me?" Frank squinted. We must have looked tiny and fuzzy to him too. "Is that... can barely... Rayner?" "Yes," she said. "We're on our way back. The ships are incoming." "I know. Scouts report." Frank's voice crackled. He seemed to be in some sort of large cave, legionnaires hustling behind him, digging holes and carrying large urns of some kind. "What are you doing?" Rayner asked. "Where are you?" "Caldecott," Frank said. "Just defensive stuff." I wasn't sure if his voice fuzzed out that time because of static, or if he was being evasive. Judging from his expression, we'd caught him at an awkward moment. "Any word? Michael?" he asked, definitely changing the subject. "Should have, by now." "What?" Rayner asked, loud enough to make Meg snort in her sleep. "No, I was going to ask if you'd heard anything. They were supposed to stop the yachts at the Golden Gate, since the ships got through." Her voice faltered. There could have been a dozen reasons why Michael Cahill and his commando team had failed to stop the Emperor's yachts. None of them were good, and none of them could change what would happen next. The only thing now standing between Camp Jupiter and fiery annihilation were the Emperor's pride, which made them insist on making a ground assault first and an empty Smucker's jam jar that might or might not allow us to summon godly help. "Just hang on," Rayner said. "Tell Ella to get things ready for the ritual." "Can't." "What?" Frank's face melted to a smudge of coloured light. His voice sounded like gravel shaking in an aluminium can. Hazel, need to..." The scroll burst into flames, which was not what my crotch needed at that particular moment. I swatted the cinders off my trousers as Meg woke, yawning and blinking. "What did you do?" she demanded. "Nothing. I didn't know the message would self-destruct." "Bad connection," Rayner guessed. "The silence must be breaking up slowly, like working its way outward from the epicenter at Sutro Tower. We overheated the scroll." "That's possible." I stomped out the last bits of smouldering vellum. "Hopefully we'll be able to send an iris message once we reach camp." "If we reach camp," Rayner grumbled. "This traffic. Oh." She pointed to a blinking road sign ahead of us. "HWY 24E closed at Caldecott Tunnel for emergency maintenance. Seek alternative routes." "Emergency maintenance," said Meg. "You think it's the mist again? Clearing people out?" "Maybe." Rayner frowned at the lines of cars in front of us. "No wonder everything's backed up. What was Frank doing in the tunnel? We didn't discuss any..." She knitted her eyebrows, as if an unpleasant thought had occurred to her. "We have to get back. Fast." The Emperors will need time to organise their ground assault, I said. They won't launch their ballistae until after they've tried to take the camp intact. Maybe the traffic will slow them down too. They'll have to seek alternative routes. They're on boats, dummy, said Meg. She was right, and once the assault forces landed, they'd be marching on foot, not driving. Still, I liked the image of the Emperors and their army approaching the Caldecott tunnel, seeing a bunch of flashing signs and orange cones, and deciding, well done, we'll have to come back tomorrow. We could ditch the truck, Rayner mused. Then she glanced at us and clearly dismissed the idea. None of us was in any shape to run a half marathon from the middle of the Bay Bridge to Camp Jupiter. She muttered a curse. We need... Just ahead, a maintenance truck was trundling along, a worker on the tailgate, picking up cones that had been blocking the left lane for some unknown reason. Typical Friday at rush hour, with the Caldecott tunnel shut down. Obviously, what you wanted to do was close one lane of traffic on the area's busiest bridge. This meant, however, that ahead of the maintenance truck there was an empty, extremely illegal to drive in lane that stretched as far as that Lester could see. Hold on, Rayner warned, and as soon as we edged past the maintenance truck, she swerved in front of it, ploughing down a half-dozen cones and gunned the engine. The maintenance truck blared its horn and flashed its headlights. Rayner's greyhounds barked and wagged their tails in reply like, see ya! I imagined we would have a few California Highway Patrol vehicles ready to chase us at the bottom of the bridge, but for the time being we blasted past traffic at speeds that would have been creditable even for my sun chariot. We reached the Oakland side. Still no sign of pursuit. Rayner veered onto the 580, smashing through a line of orange delineator posts and rocketing up the merge ramp for Highway 24. She politely ignored the guys in hard hats who waved their orange danger signs and screamed things at us. We had found our alternative route. It was the regular route we weren't supposed to take. I glanced behind us. No cops yet. Out on the water, the Emperor's yachts had passed Treasure Island and were leisurely taking up positions, forming a necklace of billion-dollar luxury death machines across the bay. I saw no trace of the smaller landing craft, which meant they must have reached the shore. That wasn't good. On the bright side, we were making great time. We soared along the overpass all by ourselves, our destination only a few miles away. We're going to make it, I said, like a fool. Once again, I had broken the first law of Percy Jackson. Never say something is going to work out because as soon as you do, it won't. Clump! Above our heads, foot-shaped indentations appeared in the truck's ceiling. The vehicle lurched under the extra weight. It was Deja Ghoul all over again. Aurum and Argentum barked wildly. Euronymous, Meg yelled. Where do they come from? I complained. Do they just hang around on highway signs all day waiting to drop? Claws punctured the metal and upholstery. I knew what would happen next. Skylight installation. Rayner shouted, Apollo, take the wheel. Meg, accelerator. For a heartbeat, I thought she meant that as some kind of prayer. In moments of personal crisis, my followers often used to implore me, Apollo, take the wheel, hoping I would guide them through their problems. Most of the time, though, they didn't mean it literally, nor was I physically sitting in the passenger seat, nor did they add anything about Meg and accelerators. Rayner didn't wait for me to figure it out. She released her grip and reached behind her seat, groping for a weapon. I lunged across and grabbed the wheel. Meg put her foot on the accelerator. Quarters were much too close for Rayner to use her sword, but that didn't bother her. Rayner had daggers. She unsheathed one, glared at the roof bending and breaking above us, and muttered, Nobody messes with my truck. A lot happened in the next 2 seconds. The roof ripped open, revealing the familiar, disgusting sight of a fly-coloured Euronymous, its white eyes bulging, its fangs dripping with saliva, its vulture feather loincloth fluttering in the wind. The smell of rancid meat wafted into the truck, making my stomach turn. All the zombie poison in my system seemed to ignite at once. The Euronymous screamed, Foo! Its battle cry was cut short, however, when Rayner launched herself upward and impaled her dagger straight up its vulture diaper. She had apparently been studying the weak spots of the ghouls. She had found one. The Euronymous toppled off the truck, which would have been wonderful, except that I, too, felt like I had been stabbed in the diaper. I said, Ugh. My hand slipped off the wheel. Meg hit the accelerator in alarm. With Rayner still half out of the cab, her greyhounds howling furiously, our Chevy veered across the ramp and crashed straight through the guardrail. Lucky me. Once again I was flying off an East Bay highway in a car that couldn't fly. Chapter 32. We have a special. Today on Slightly Used Trucks. Thanks, Target shoppers. My son, Asclepius, once explained the purpose of physical shock to me. He said, it's a safety mechanism for coping with trauma. When the human brain experiences something too violent and frightening to process, it just stops recording. Minutes, hours, even days can be a complete blank in the victim's memory. Perhaps this explained why I had no recollection of the Chevy crashing. After hurtling through the guardrail, the next thing I remembered was stumbling around the parking lot of a Target store, pushing a three-wheeled shopping trolley filled with Meg. I was muttering the lyrics to Sitting on the Dock of the Bay. Meg, semi-conscious, was listlessly waving one hand trying to conduct. My cart bumped into a steaming crumpled heap of metal, a red Chevy, Silverado with its tyres popped, its windshield broken, and its airbags deployed. Some inconsiderate driver had plummeted from the heavens and landed right on top of the trolley park, smashing a dozen shopping trolleys beneath the weight of the pickup. Who would do such a thing? Wait. I heard growling. A few car lengths away, 2 metal greyhounds stood protectively over their wounded master, keeping a small crowd of spectators at bay. A young woman in maroon and gold, right, I remembered her, she liked to laugh at me, was propped on her elbows, grimacing mightily, her left leg bent at an unnatural angle. Her face was the same colour as the tarmac. Raina! I wedged Meg's shopping trolley against the truck and ran to help the praetor. Orem and Argentum let me through. Oh! I couldn't seem to say anything else. I should have known what to do. I was a healer, but that break in the leg, yikes. I'm alive, Raina said through gritted teeth. Meg? She's conducting, I said. One of the Target shoppers inched forward, braving the fury of the dogs. I called 911. Is there anything else I can do? She'll be fine, I yelped. Thank you. I'm a doctor. The mortal woman blinked. Are you asking me? No, I'm a doctor. Hey, said a second shopper. Your other friend is rolling away. Ack! I ran after Meg, who was muttering, whee, as she picked up steam in her red plastic trolley. I grabbed the handles and navigated her back to Raina's side. The praetor tried to move but choked on the pain. I might black out. No. Think, Apollo, think. Should I wait for the mortal paramedics who knew nothing of ambrosia and nectar? Should I check for more first aid supplies in Meg's gardening belt? A familiar voice from across the parking lot yelled, Thank you, everybody. We'll take it from here. Lavinia Asimov jogged towards us, a dozen naiads and fawns in her wake, many of whom I recognized from People's Park. Most were dressed in camouflage, covered with vines and branches like they had just arrived via Beanstalk. Lavinia wore pink camo pants and a green tank top, her manuballista clanking against her shoulder. With her spiky pink hair and pink eyebrows, her jaw working furiously on a wad of bubblegum, she just radiated authority figure. This is now an active investigation scene, she announced to the mortals. Thank you, Target shoppers. Please move along. Either the tone of her voice or the barking of the greyhounds finally convinced the onlookers to disperse. Nevertheless, sirens were blaring in the distance. Soon we'd be surrounded by paramedics, or the highway patrol, or both. Mortals weren't nearly as used to vehicles hurtling off highway overpasses as I was. I stared at our pink-haired friend. Lavinia, what are you doing here? Secret mission, she announced. That's Kakaskia, Raina crumbled. You left your post. You're in so much trouble. Lavinia's nature spirit friends looked jumpy, like they were on the verge of scattering, but their pink-frosted leader calmed down with a glance. Raina's greyhounds didn't snarl or attack, which I guess meant they detected no lies from Lavinia. All due respect, Praetor, she said, but it looks like you're in more trouble than I am at the moment. Harold, Philippe, stabilise her leg, and let's get her out of this parking lot before more mortals arrive. Reginald, push Meg's trolley. Latoya, retrieve whatever supplies they have in the truck. Please, I'll help Apollo. We make for those woods, now. Lavinia's definition of woods was generous. I would have called it a gully where shopping trolleys went to die. Still, her People's Dirt Park platoon worked with surprising efficiency. In a matter of minutes, they had us all safely hidden in the ditch among the broken trolleys and trash-festooned trees, just as emergency vehicles came wailing into the parking lot. Harold and Philippe splinted Raina's leg, which only caused her to scream and throw up a little. 2 other fawns constructed a stretcher for her out of branches and an old clothing, while Orem and Argentum tried to help by bringing them sticks. Or perhaps they just wanted to play fetch. Reginald extricated Meg from her shopping trolley and revived her with hand-fed bits of ambrosia. A couple of dryads checked me for injuries, meaning even more injuries than I'd had before, but there wasn't much they could do. They didn't like the look of my zombie-infected face, or the way the undead infection made me smell. Unfortunately, my condition was beyond any nature-spirit healing. As they moved off, one muttered to her friend, "Once it gets fully dark." "I know," said her friend, "with a blood moon tonight. Poor guy." I decided to ignore them. It seemed the best way to avoid bursting into tears. Latoya, who must have been a redwood dryad, judging from her burgundy complexion and impressive size, crouched next to me and deposited all the supplies she'd retrieved from the truck. I grabbed, frantically, not for my bow and quiver or even for my ukulele, but for my backpack. I almost fainted with relief when I found the Smucker's jar inside, still intact. "Thank you," I told her. She nodded somberly. "A good jar is hard to find." Raina struggled to sit up among the fawns, fussing over her. "We're wasting time. We have to get back to camp." Lavinia arched her pink eyebrows. "You're not going anywhere with that leg, Praetor. Even if you could, you wouldn't be much help. We can heal you faster if you just relax." "Relax? The Legion needs me. It needs you too, Lavinia. How could you desert?" "Okay, first I didn't desert. You don't know all the facts. You left camp without leave. You..." Raina leaned forward too fast and gasped in agony. The fawns took her shoulders. They helped her to sit back, easing her onto the new stretcher with its lovely padding of moss, trash and old tie-dyed t-shirts. "You left your comrades," Raina croaked. "Your friends." "I'm right here," Lavinia said. "I'm going to ask Philippe to lull you to sleep now, so you can rest and heal." "No, you can't run away." Lavinia snorted. "Who said anything about running away? Remember, Raina, this was your backup plan. Plan L for Lavinia. When we all get back to camp, you're going to thank me. You'll tell everybody this was your idea." "What? I would never. I didn't give you any such... This is mutiny." I glanced at the greyhounds, waiting for them to rise to their master's defence and tear Lavinia apart. Strangely, they just kept circling Raina, occasionally licking her face or sniffing her broken leg. They seemed concerned about her condition, but not at all about Lavinia's rebellious lies. "Lavinia," Raina pleaded, "I'll have to bring you up on desertion charges. Don't do this. Don't make me." "Now, Philippe," Lavinia ordered. The fawn raised his panpipes and played a lullaby, soft and low, right next to Raina's head. "Can't." Raina struggled to keep her eyes open. "Won't. Ugh." She went limp and began to snore. "That's better." Lavinia turned to me. "Don't worry, I'll leave her someplace safe, with a couple of fawns and, of course, Aurum and Argentum. She'll be taken care of while she heals. You and Meg, do what you need to do." Her confident stance and her take-charge tone made her almost unrecognisable as the gawky, nervous legionnaire we'd met at Lake Temescal. She reminded me more of Raina now, and of Meg. Mostly, though, she seemed like a stranger, stronger version of herself, a Lavinia, who had decided what she needed to do and would not rest until she did it. "Where are you going?" I asked, still utterly confused. "Why won't you come back to camp with us?" Meg stumbled over, ambrosia crumbles stuck around her mouth. "Don't pester her," she told me. Then, to Lavinia, "Is Peaches?" Lavinia shook her head. "He and Don are with the advance group, making contact with the Nereids." Meg pouted. "Yeah, okay, the Emperor's ground forces?" Lavinia's expression turned sombre. "They already passed by. We hid and watched. Yeah, it's not good. I'm sure they'll be in combat with the Legion by the time you get there. You remember the path I told you about?" "Yeah," Meg agreed. "Okay, good luck." "Whoa, whoa, whoa!" I tried to make a time-out sign, though my uncoordinated hands made it look more like a tent. "What are you talking about? What path? Why would you come out here just to hide as the enemy army passes by? Why are Peaches and Don talking to... Wait, Nereids? Nereids are spirits of the sea. The nearest ones would be... Oh, I couldn't see much from our trash-filled gully. I definitely couldn't see the San Francisco Bay or the string of yachts taking up position to fire on the camp, but I knew we were close. I looked at Lavinia with newfound respect, or disrespect. Which is it when you realise that someone you knew was crazy is actually even crazier than you suspected? "Lavinia, you are not planning..." "Stop right there," she warned, "or I'll have Philippe put you down for a nap too." "But Michael Cahail..." "Yeah, we know. He failed. The Emperor's troops were bragging about it as they marched past. It's one more thing they have to pay for." Brave words, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of worry, telling me she was more terrified than she let on. She was having trouble keeping up her own courage and preventing her makeshift troops from losing their nerve. She did not need me reminding her how insane her plan was. "We've all got a lot to do," she said. "Good luck." She ruffled Meg's hair, which did not need any more ruffling. "Dryads and fawns, let's move." Harold and Philippe picked up Raina's makeshift stretcher and jogged off down the gully, Aurum and Argentum bounding around them like, "Oh boy, another hike." Lavinia and the others followed. Soon they were lost in the undergrowth, vanishing into the terrain, as only nature spirits and girls with bright pink hair can do. Meg studied my face. "You whole?" I almost wanted to laugh. Where had she picked up that expression? I had zombie poison coursing through my body and up into my face. The Dryads thought I would turn into a shambling undead minion of Tarquin as soon as it got fully dark. I was shaking from exhaustion and fear. We apparently had an enemy army between us and camp, and Lavinia was leading a suicide attack on the Imperial fleet with inexperienced nature spirits, when an actual elite commando force had already failed. When had I last felt whole? I wanted to believe it was back when I was a god, but that wasn't true. I hadn't been completely myself for centuries, maybe millennia. At the moment, I felt more like a hole, a void in the cosmos through which Harpocrates, the Sibyl, and a lot of people I cared about had vanished. "I'll manage," I said. "Good, because look." Meg pointed towards the Oakland Hills. I thought I was seeing fog, but fog didn't rise vertically from hillsides. Close to the perimeter of Camp Jupiter, fires were burning. "We need wheels," said Meg. Chapter 33. Welcome to the war. We hope you enjoy your death. Please come again soon. Okay, but why did it have to be bicycles? I understood that cars were a deal breaker. We had crashed enough vehicles for 1 week. I understood that jogging to camp was out of the question, given the fact that we could barely stand. But why didn't demigods have some sort of ride-share app for summoning giant eagles? I decided I would create one as soon as I became a god again, right after I figured out a way to let demigods use smartphones safely. Across the street from Target stood a rack of canary yellow glow bikes. Meg inserted a credit card into the kiosk. Where she got the card, I had no idea. Freed 2 bicycles from the rack and offered one to me. Joy and happiness. Now we could pedal into battle like the neon yellow warriors of old. We took the side streets and pavements, using the columns of smoke in the hills to guide our way. With Highway 24 closed, traffic was snarled everywhere, angry drivers honking and yelling and threatening violence. I was tempted to tell them that if they really wanted a fight, they could just follow us. We could use a few thousand angry commuters on our side. As we passed the Rock Ridge BART station, we spotted the first enemy troops. Pandai patrolled the elevated platform, with furry black ears folded around themselves like firefighter turnout coats, and flat-head axes in their hands. Fire engines were parked along College Avenue, their lights strobing in the underpass. More faux firefighter Pandai guarded the station doors, turning away mortals. I hoped the real firefighters were okay, because firefighters are important, and also because they are hot. And no, that wasn't relevant right then. This way. Meg veered up the steepest hill she could find, just to annoy me. I was forced to stand as I pedalled, pushing with all my weight to make progress against the incline. At the summit, more bad news. In front of us, arrayed across the higher hills, troops marched doggedly towards Camp Jupiter. There were squads of Blemai, Pandai, and even some 6-armed Earthborn who had served Gaia in the recent unpleasantness, all fighting their way through flaming trenches, staked barricades, and Roman skirmishers, trying to put my archery lessons to good use. In the early evening gloom, I could only see bits and pieces of the battle. Judging from the mass of glittering armour and the forest of battle pennants, the main part of the Emperor's army was concentrated on Highway 24, forcing its way towards the Caldecott Tunnel. Enemy catapults hurled projectiles towards the Legion's positions, but most disappeared in bursts of purple light as soon as they got close. I assumed that was the work of Terminus, doing his part to defend the camp's borders. Meanwhile, at the base of the tunnel, flashes of lightning pinpointed the location of the Legion's standard. Tendrils of electricity zigzagged down the hillsides, arcing through enemy lines and frying them to dust. Camp Jupiter's ballistae launched giant flaming spears at the invaders, raking through their lines and starting more forest fires. The Emperor's troops kept coming. The ones making the best progress were huddled behind large armoured vehicles that crawled on 8 legs and... oh gods! My guts felt like they just got tangled in my bike chain. Those weren't vehicles. "Mermeeks," I said. "Meg, those are I see them." She didn't even slow down. "It doesn't change anything. Come on." How could it not change anything? We'd faced a nest of those giant ants at Camp Half-Blood and barely survived. Meg had nearly been pulped into Gerber's larvae puree. Now we were confronting Mermeeks training for war, snapping trees in half with their pincers and spraying acid to melt through the camp's defensive pickets. This was a brand new flavour of horrible. "We'll never get through their lines," I protested. "Lavinia's secret tunnel. It collapsed. Not that tunnel, a different secret tunnel. How many does she have?" "Dunno, a lot. Come on." With that rousing oratory complete, Meg pedalled onward. I followed, having nothing better to do. She led me up a dead-end street to a generator station at the base of an electrical tower. The area was ringed in barbed wire fencing, but the gate stood wide open. If Meg had told me to climb the tower, I would have given up and made my peace with zombie eternity. Instead, she pointed to the side of the generator, where metal doors were set onto the concrete, like the entrance to a storm cellar or a bomb shelter. "Hold my bike," she said. She jumped off and summoned one of her swords. With a single strike, she slashed through the padlocked chains, then pulled open the doors, revealing a dark shaft slanting downward at a precarious angle. "Perfect," she said. "It's big enough to ride through." "What?" She hopped back on her go-glow and plunged into the tunnel, the click-click-click of her bike chain echoing off the concrete walls. "You have a very broad definition of perfect," I muttered. Then I coasted in after her. Much to my surprise, in the total darkness of the tunnel, the go-glow bike actually, glowed. I suppose I should have expected that. Ahead of me, I could see the faint, fuzzy apparition of Meg's neon war machine. When I looked down, the yellow aura of my own bike was almost blinding. It did little to help me navigate down the steep shaft, but it would make me a much easier target for enemies to pick out in the gloom. Hooray! Against all odds, I did not wipe out and break my neck. The tunnel levelled, then began to climb again. I wondered who had excavated this passageway and why they hadn't installed a convenient lift system, so I didn't have to expend so much energy pedalling. Somewhere overhead, an explosion shook the tunnel, which was excellent motivation to keep moving. After a bit more sweating and gasping, I realised I could discern a dim square of light ahead of us, an exit covered in branches. Meg burst straight through it. I wobbled after her, emerging in a landscape lit by fire and lightning and ringing with the sounds of chaos. We had arrived in the middle of the war zone. I will give you free advice. If you plan to pop into a battle, the place you do not want to be in is the middle of it. I recommend the very back, where the general often has a comfortable tent with hors d'oeuvres and beverages. But the middle? No, always bad, especially if you arrive on canary yellow glow-in-the-dark bikes. As soon as Meg and I emerged, we were spotted by a dozen large humanoids, covered in shaggy blonde hair. They pointed at us and began to scream. Cromonde. Wow, I didn't even see any of their kind since Dionysus' drunken invasion of India back in the BCE. Their species has gorgeous grey eyes, but that's about the only flattering thing I can say about them. Their dirty, shaggy blonde pelts make them look like Muppets who have been used as dust rags. Their dog-like teeth clearly never get a proper flossing. They are strong, aggressive, and can only communicate in ear-splitting shrieks. I once asked Ares and Aphrodite if the Cromondi were their secret love children from their long-standing affair, because they were such a perfect mix of the two Olympians. Ares and Aphrodite did not find that funny. Meg, like any reasonable child when confronted with a dozen hairy giants, hopped off her bike, summoned her swords and charged. I yelped in alarm and drew my bow. I was low on arrows after playing catch with the ravens, but I managed to slay 6 of the Cromondi before Meg reached them. Despite how exhausted she must have been, she handily dispatched the remaining 6 with a blur of her golden blades. I laughed. Actually laughed with satisfaction. It felt so good to be a decent archer again, and to watch Meg at her swordplay. What a team we made. That's one of the dangers of being in a battle, along with getting killed. When things are going well, you tend to get tunnel vision. You zero in on your little area and forget the big picture. As Meg gave the last Cromondi a haircut straight through the chest, I allowed myself to think that we were winning. Then I scanned our surroundings and I realised we were surrounded by a whole lot of not winning. Gargantuan ants trampled their way towards us, spewing acid to clear the hillside of skirmishers. Several steaming bodies in Roman armour sprawled in the undergrowth, and I did not want to think about who they might have been or how they had died. Pandai in black Kevlar and helmets, almost invisible in the dusk, glided around on their huge parasail ears, dropping onto any unsuspecting demigod they could find. Higher up, giant eagles fought with giant ravens, their wingtips glinting in the blood-red moonlight. Just 100 yards to my left, wolf-headed Cyclopai howled as they bounded into battle, crashing into the shields of the nearest cohort. The third, which looked small and alone and critically undermanned in a sea of bad guys. That was only on our hill. I could see fires burning across the whole western front, along the valley's borders, maybe half a mile of patchwork battles. Ballistae launching glowing spears from the summits, catapults hurled boulders that shattered on impact, spraying shards of imperial gold into the enemy lines. Flaming logs, always a fun Roman party game, rolled down the hillsides, smashing through packs of earthborn. For all the Legion's efforts, the enemy kept advancing. On the empty eastbound lanes of Highway 24, the Emperor's main columns marched towards the Caldecott Tunnel, their gold and purple banners raised high. Roman colours, Roman emperors bent on destroying the last true Roman legion. This was how it ended. I fought bitterly, not fighting threats from the outside, but fighting against the ugliest side of our own history. Testudo! A centurion shout brought my attention back to the third cohort. They were struggling to form a protective turtle formation with their shields as the Cynophili swarmed over them in a snarling wave of fur and claws. "Meg," I yelled, pointing to the imperiled cohort. She ran towards them, me at her heels. As we closed in, I scooped up an abandoned quiver from the ground, trying not to think about why it had been dropped there, and sent a fresh volley of arrows into the pack. 6 fell dead, 7, 8. But there were still too many. Meg screamed in fury and launched herself at the nearest wolf-headed men. She was clearly surrounded, but our advance had distracted the pack, giving the third cohort a few precious seconds to regroup. "Offence, Romulus!" shouted the centurion. If you ever seen a woodlouse uncurl, revealing its hundreds of legs, you can imagine what the third cohort looked like as it broke Testudo and formed a bristling forest of spears, skewering the Cynocephali. I was so impressed, I almost got my face chewed off by a stray charging wolfman. Just before it reached me, Centurion Larry hurled his javelin. The monster fell at my feet, impaled in the middle of his incredibly unmanscaped back. "You made it!" Larry grinned at us. "Where's Raina?" "She's okay," I said. She's alive." "Cool. Frank wants to see you, ASAP." Meg stumbled to my side, breathing hard, her swords glistening with monster goo. "Hey, Larry, how's it going?" "Terrible." Larry sounded delighted. "Carl, Reza, escort these two to Praetor Zang immediately." "Yes, sir." Our escorts hustled off towards the Caldecott tunnel, while behind us Larry called his troops back to action. "Come on, Legionnaires! We've drilled for this! We've got this!" After a few more terrible minutes of dodging pandai, jumping fiery craters, and skirting mobs of monsters, Carl and Reza brought us safely to Frank Zang's command post at the mouth of the Caldecott tunnel. Much to my disappointment, there were no hors d'oeuvres or beverages. There wasn't even a tent, just a bunch of stressed-out Romans in full battle gear, rushing around carrying orders and shoring up defences. Above us, on the concrete terrace that stretched above the tunnel's mouth, Jacob, the standard-bearer, stood with the Legion's eagle and a couple of spotters, keeping watch on all the approaches. Whenever an enemy got too close, Jacob would zap them like the Oprah Winfrey version of Jupiter. "And you get a lightning bolt, and you get a lightning bolt." Unfortunately, he'd been using the eagle so much that it was beginning to smoke. Even super powerful magic items have their limits. The Legion's standard was close to total overload. When Frank Zang saw us, a whole G of weight seemed to lift from his shoulders. "Thank the gods, Apollo, your face looks terrible. Where's Raina?" Long story. I was about to launch into the short version of that long story when Hazel Levesque materialised on a horse right next to me, which was an excellent way of testing whether my heart still worked properly. "What's going on?" Hazel asked. "Apollo, your face." "I know," I sighed. Her immortal steed, the lightning-fast Arion, gave me the side-eye and nickered as if to say, "This fool ain't no Apollo." "Good to see you too, cuz," I grumbled. I told them all in brief what had happened, with Meg occasionally adding helpful comments like he was stupid, and he was more stupid, and he did good, then he got stupid again. When Hazel heard about our encounter in the Target parking lot, she gritted her teeth. "Lavinia, that girl, I swear, if anything happens to Raina..." "Let's focus on what we can control," Frank said, though he looked shaken that Raina wouldn't be coming back to help. "Apollo, we'll help. We'll buy you as much time as possible for your summoning. Terminus is doing what he can to slow the Emperors down. Right now, I've got ballistae and catapults targeting the Myrmeeks. If we can't bring them down, we'll never stop the advance." Hazel grimaced. The first to fourth cohorts are spread pretty thin across those hills. Arion and I have been zipping back and forth between them as needed, but... She stopped herself from stating the obvious. "We're losing ground. Frank, if you can spare me for a minute, I'll get Apollo and Meg to Temple Hill. Ella and Tyson are waiting." "Go." "Wait," I said. Not that I wasn't super anxious to summon a god with a jam jar, but something Hazel said had made me uneasy. If the first to fourth cohorts are here, where's the fifth? "Guarding New Rome," said Hazel. "Dakota's with them. At the moment, thank the gods, the city is secure. No sign of Tarquin." Pop. Right next to me appeared a marble bust of Terminus, dressed in a First World War British Army cap and khaki greatcoat that covered him to the foot of his pedestal. With his loose sleeves, he might have been a double amputee from the trenches of the Somme. Unfortunately, I'd met more than a few of those in the Great War. "The city is not secure," he announced. "Tarquin is attacking." "What?" Hazel looked personally offended. "From where?" "Underneath." "The sewers," Hazel cursed. "But how?" "Tarquin built the original Cloaca Maxima of Rome," I reminded her. "He knows sewers." "I remember that. I sealed the exits myself." "Well, somehow he unsealed them," Terminus said. The 5th cohort needs help immediately." Hazel wavered, clearly rattled by Tarquin outfoxing her. "Go," Frank told her. "I'll send the 4th cohort to reinforce you." Hazel laughed nervously. "And leave you here with only 3? No, it's fine," Frank said. "Terminus, can you open our defensive barriers here at the main gate?" "Why would I do that?" "We'll try the Wakanda thing." "The what?" "You know," Frank said. "We'll funnel the enemy into one location." Terminus glowered. "I do not recall any Wakanda thing in the Roman military manuals, but very well." Hazel frowned. "Frank, you're not going to do anything stupid." "We'll concentrate our people here and hold the tunnel. I can do this." He mustered another confident smile. "Good luck, guys. See you on the other side." Or not, I thought. Frank didn't wait for more protests. He marched off, shouting orders to form up the troops and send the 4th cohort into New Rome. I remembered the hazy images I'd seen from the holographic scroll, Frank ordering his workers around in the Caldecott tunnel, digging and toting urns. I recalled Ella's cryptic words about bridges and fires. I didn't like where those thoughts led me. "Saddle up, kids," Hazel said, offering me a hand. Arian whinnied indignantly. "Yes, I know," Hazel said. "You don't like carrying 3. We'll just drop these 2 off at Temple Hill and then head straight for the city. There'll be plenty of undead for you to trample, I promise." That seemed to mollify the horse. I climbed on behind Hazel. Meg took the rumble seat on the horse's rear. I barely had time to hug Hazel's waist before Arian zoomed off, leaving my stomach on the Oakland side of the hills. Chapter 34. Oh, insert name here. Please hear us and fill in blank. What is this, Mad Libs? Tyson and Ella were not good at waiting. We found them at the steps of Jupiter's temple, Ella pacing and wringing her hands, Tyson bouncing up and down in excitement like a boxer ready for round 1. The heavy Hessian bags hanging from a belt around Ella's waist swung and clunked together, reminding me of Hephaestus's office desk toy, the one with the ball bearings that bounced against each other. I hated visiting Hephaestus's office. His desk toys were so mesmerising, found myself staring at them for hours, sometimes decades. I missed the entire 1480s that way. Tyson's bare chest was now completely covered with tattooed lines of prophecy. When he saw us, he broke into a grin. "Yay!" he exclaimed. "Zoom pony!" I was not surprised Tyson had dubbed Arian Zoom Pony, or that he seemed happier to see the horse than me. I was surprised that Arian, despite some resentful snorting, allowed the Cyclops to pet his snout. Arian had never struck me as the cuddly type. Then again, Tyson and Arian were both related through Poseidon, which made them brothers of a sort, and, you know what, I'm going to stop thinking about this before my brain melts. Ella scuttled over. "Late, very late. Come on, Apollo, you're late." I bit back the urge to tell her that we'd had a few things going on. I climbed off Arian's back and waited for Meg, but she stayed on with Hazel. "You don't need me for the summoning thing," Meg said. "I'm going to help Hazel and unleash the unicorns." "But—" "Godspeed," Hazel told me. Arian vanished, leaving a trail of smoke down the hillside and Tyson patting empty air. "Oh," the Cyclops pouted. "Zoom Pony left." "Yes, he does that." I tried to convince myself Meg would be fine. I'd see her soon. The last words I ever heard from her would not be "unleash the unicorns." "Now, if you're ready." "Late. Later than ready," Ella complained. "Pick a temple. Yes, need to pick." "I need to—" "Single god summoning." Tyson did his best to roll up his trouser leg while hopping over to meet me on one foot. "Here, I will show you again. It's on my thigh." "That's okay," I told him. "I remember, it's just a—" I scanned the hill. So many temples and shrines, even more now that the Legion had completed its Jason-inspired building spree. So many statues of gods staring at me. As a member of a pantheon, I had an aversion to picking only one god. That was like picking your favourite child or your favourite musician. If you were capable of picking only one, you were doing something wrong. Also, picking one god meant all the other gods would be mad at me. It didn't matter if they wouldn't have wanted to help me or would have laughed in my face if I'd asked. They would still be offended that I hadn't put them at the top of my list. I knew how they thought. I used to be one of them. Sure, there were some obvious no's. I would not be summoning Juno. I would not bother with Venus, especially since Friday night was her spa night with the three Graces. Somnus was a non-starter. He'd answer my call, promise to be right over, and then fall asleep again. I gazed at the giant statue of Jupiter, Optimus Maximus, his purple toga rippling like a matador's cape. "Come on," he seemed to be telling me. "You know you want to." The most powerful of the Olympians. It was well within his power to smite the Emperor's armies, heal my zombie wound, and set everything right at Camp Jupiter, which after all was named in his honour. He might even notice all the heroic things I'd done, decide I'd suffered enough and free me from the punishment of my mortal form. Then again, he might not. Could be that he was expecting me to call on him for help. Once I did, he might make the heavens rumble with his laughter and a deep, divine nope. To my surprise, I realized I did not want my godhood back that badly. I didn't even want to live that badly. If Jupiter expected me to crawl to him for help, begging for mercy, he could stick his lightning bolt right up his cloaca maxima. There had only ever been one choice. Deep down, I'd always known which god I had to call. Follow me, I told Ella and Tyson. I ran for the Temple of Diana. Now, I'll admit I've never been a huge fan of Artemis's Roman persona. As I've said before, I never felt like I personally changed that much during Roman times. I just stayed Apollo. Artemis, though. You know how it is when your sister goes through her moody teenage years. She changes her name to Diana, cuts her hair, hangs out with a different, more hostile set of maiden hunters, starts associating with Hecate and the moon, and basically acts weird. When we first relocated to Rome, the two of us were worshipped together like in the old days, twin gods with our own temple, but soon Diana went off and did her own thing. We just didn't talk like we used to, when we were young and Greek, you know. I was apprehensive about summoning her Roman incarnation, but I needed help. And Diana, was the most likely to respond, even if she would never let me hear the end of it. Afterwards, besides, I missed her terribly. Yes, I said it, if I was going to die tonight, which seemed increasingly likely, first I wanted to see my sister one last time. Her temple was an outdoor garden, as one might expect from a goddess of the wild. Inside a ring of mature oak trees gleamed a silver pool with a single perpetual geyser burbling in the centre. I imagine the place was meant to evoke Diana's old Oak Grove sanctuary at Lake Nemi, one of the first places where the Romans had worshipped her. At the edge of the pool stood a fire pit stacked with wood, ready for lighting. I wondered if the Legion kept every shrine and temple in such good maintenance, just in case someone got a craving for a last-minute middle-of-the-night burnt offering. Apollo should light the fire, Ella said. I will mix ingredients. I will dance, Tyson announced. I didn't know whether that was part of the ritual, or if he just felt like it, but when a tattooed Cyclops decides to launch into an interpretive dance routine, it's best not to ask questions. Ella rummaged in her supply pouches, pulling out herbs, spices, and vials of oil, which made me realise how long it had been since I'd eaten. Why wasn't my stomach growling? I glanced at the blood moon, rising over the hilltops. I hoped my next meal would not be brains. I looked around for a torch or a box of matches. Nothing. Then I thought, of course not. I could have the wood pre-stacked for me, but Diana, always the wilderness expert, would expect me to create my own fire. I unslung my bow and pulled out an arrow. I gathered the lightest, driest kindling into a small pile. It had been a long time since I'd made a fire the old mortal way, spinning an arrow in a bowstring to create friction. But I gave it a go. I fumbled half a dozen times, nearly poking my eye out. My archery student Jacob would have been proud. I tried to ignore the sound of explosions in the distance. I spun the arrow until my gut wound felt like it was opening up. My hands became slick with popped blisters. The god of the sun struggling to make fire. The ironies would never cease. Finally, I succeeded in creating the tiniest of flames. After some desperate cupping, puffing, and praying, the fire was lit. I stood trembling from exhaustion. Tyson kept dancing in his own eternal music, flinging out his arms and spinning like a 300-pound, heavily tattooed Julie Andrews in The Sound of Music, remake Quentin Tarantino always wanted to do. I convinced him it was a bad idea. You can thank me later. Ella began sprinkling her proprietary blend of oils, spices, and herbs into the pit. The smoke smelled like a Mediterranean summer feast. It filled me with a sense of peace, reminding me of happier times when we gods were adored by millions of worshippers. You never appreciate a simple pleasure like that until it's taken away. The valley turned quiet, as if I'd stepped back into Harpocrates' sphere of silence. Perhaps it was just a lull in the fighting, but I felt as if all of Camp Jupiter were holding its breath, waiting for me to complete the ritual. With trembling hands, I pulled the Sibyl's glass jar from my backpack. What now? I asked Ella. Tyson, Ella said, waving him over. That was good dancing. Now show Apollo your armpit. Tyson lumbered over, grinning and sweaty. He lifted his left arm much closer to my face than I would have liked. See? Oh, gods, I recalled. Ella, why would you write the summoning ritual in his armpit? That's where it goes, she said. It really tickled, Tyson laughed. I will begin. I tried to focus on the words and not the hairy armpit that they encircled. I tried not to breathe any more than necessary. I will say this, however, Tyson had excellent personal hygiene. Whenever I was forced to inhale, I did not pass out from his body odour, despite his exuberant, sweaty dancing. The only smell I detected was a hint of peanut butter. Why? I did not want to know. "Oh, Protector of Rome," I read aloud. "Oh, insert name here." Ella said, "That's where you, I'll start again. Oh, Protector of Rome. Oh, Diana, Goddess of the Hunt, hear our plea and accept our offering." I do not remember all the lines. If I did, I would not record them here for just anyone to use. Summoning Diana with burnt offerings is the very definition of "do not try this at home, kids." Several times I choked up. I was tempted to add personal bits, to let Diana know it wasn't just anyone making a request. This was me. I was special. But I stuck to the armpit script. At the appropriate moment, insert sacrifice here, I dropped the Sybil's jam jar into the fire. I was afraid it might just sit there, heating up, but the glass shattered immediately, releasing a sigh of silver fumes. I hoped I hadn't squandered the soundless god's final breath. I finished the incantation. Tyson mercifully lowered his arm. Ella stared at the fire, then at the sky, her nose twitching anxiously. Apollo hesitated. She said, He didn't read the third line right. He probably messed up. I hope he didn't mess it up." "Your confidence is heartwarming," I said. But I shared her concern. I saw no signs of divine help in the night sky. The red full moon continued to leer at me, bathing the landscape in bloody light. No hunting horns trumpeted in the distance, just a fresh round of explosions from the Oakland hills and cries of battle from New Rome. "You messed up," Ella decided. "Give it time," I said. "Gods don't always show up immediately. Once it took me 10 years to answer some prayers from the city of Pompeii. By the time I got there, maybe that's not a good example." Ella wrung her hands. "Tyson and Ella will wait here in case the goddess shows up. Apollo should go fight stuff." "Oh," Tyson pouted, "but I want to fight stuff." "Tyson will wait here with Ella," Ella insisted. "Apollo, go fight." I scanned the valley. Several rooftops in New Rome were now on fire. Meg would be fighting in the streets, doing gods know what, with her weaponized unicorns. Hazel would be desperately shoring up the defences as zombies and ghouls boiled up from the sewers, attacking civilians. They needed help, and it would take me less time to reach New Rome than to get to the Caldecott Tunnel. But just thinking about joining the battle made my stomach flare with pain. I remembered how I'd collapsed in the tyrant's tomb. I would be of little use against Tarquin. Being near him would just accelerate my promotion to Zombie of the Month. I gazed at the Oakland hills, their silhouettes lit by flickering explosions. The Emperors must be battling Frank's defenders at the Caldecott Tunnel by now. Without Arian or a go-glow bike, I wasn't sure I would make it there in time to do any good, but it seemed like my least horrible option. "Charge!" I said miserably. I jogged off across the valley. Chapter 35. Such a deal for you. 2 for 1 single combat. Kill us both for free. The most embarrassing thing? As I wheezed and huffed up the hill, I found myself humming Ride of the Valkyries. Curse you, Richard Wagner. Curse you, Apocalypse Now. By the time I reached the summit, I was dizzy and drenched in sweat. I took in the scene below and decided my presence would mean nothing. I was too late. The hills were a scarred wasteland of trenches, shattered armour and broken war machines. 100 yards down Highway 24, the Emperor's troops had formed in columns. Instead of thousands, there were now a few hundred, a combination of Germanus bodyguards, Cremondi, Pandai and other humanoid tribes. One small mercy, no Myrmeeks remained. Frank's strategy of targeting the giant ants had apparently worked. At the entrance to the Caldecott Tunnel, directly beneath me, waited the remnants of the 12th Legion. A dozen ragged demigods formed a shield wall across the inbound lanes. A young woman I didn't recognise held the Legion standard, which could only mean that Jacob had either been killed or gravely wounded. The overheated gold eagle smoked so badly I couldn't make out its form. It wouldn't be zapping any more enemies today. Hannibal the elephant stood with the troops in his Kevlar armour, his trunk and legs bleeding from dozens of cuts. In front of the line towered an 8-foot-tall Kodiak bear. Frank Zhang, I assumed. 3 arrows bristled in his shoulder, but his claws were out and ready for more battle. My heart twisted. Perhaps, as a large bear, Frank could survive with a few arrows stuck in him. But what would happen when he tried to turn human again? As for the other survivors, I simply couldn't believe they were all that remained of 3 cohorts. Maybe the missing ones were wounded rather than dead. Perhaps I should have taking comfort in the possibility that for every legionnaire who had fallen, hundreds of enemies had been destroyed. But they looked so tragic, so hopelessly outnumbered, guarding the entrance to Camp Jupiter. I lifted my gaze beyond the highway, out to the bay, and lost all hope. The Emperor's fleet was still in position, a string of floating white palaces ready to rain destruction upon us, then host a massive victory celebration. Even if we somehow managed to destroy all the enemies remaining on Highway 24, those yachts were beyond any reach. Whatever Lavinia had been planning, she had apparently failed. With a single order, the Emperors could lay waste to the entire camp. The clop of hooves and rattle of wheels drew my attention back to the enemy lines. Their columns parted. The Emperors themselves came out to parley, standing side by side in a golden chariot. Commodus and Caligula looked like they'd had a competition to pick the gaudiest armour, and both of them had lost. They were clad head to toe in imperial gold, greaves, kilts, breastplates, gloves, helmets, all with elaborate Gorgon and Fury designs, encrusted with precious gems. Their faceplates were fashioned like grimacing demons. I could only tell the two emperors apart because Commodus was taller and broader in the shoulders. Pulling the chariot were two white horses. No, not horses. Their backs carried long, ugly scars on either side of their spines. Their withers were scored with lash marks. Their handlers, torturers, walked beside them, gripping their reins and keeping cattle prods ready in case the beast got any ideas. Oh gods! I fell to my knees and retched. Of all the horrors I had seen, this struck me with the worst of all. Those once beautiful steeds were Pegasi. What kind of monster would cut off the wings of a Pegasus? The emperors obviously wanted to send a message. They intended to dominate the world at any cost. They would stop at nothing. They would mutilate and maim. They would waste and destroy. Nothing was sacred except their own power. I rose unsteadily, my hopelessness turning into boiling anger. I howled, "No!" My cry echoed through the ravine. The emperor's retinue clattered to a stop. Hundreds of faces turned upward, trying to pinpoint the source of the noise. I clambered down the hill, lost my footing, somersaulted, banged into a tree, staggered to my feet and kept going. No one tried to shoot me. No one yelled, "Hooray, we're saved!" Frank's defenders and the Emperor's troops simply watched, dumbstruck, as I made my way downhill. A single, beat-up teenager in tattered clothes and mud-caked shoes, with a ukulele and a bow on my back. It was, I suspected, the least impressive arrival of reinforcements in history. At last I reached the legionnaires on the highway. Caligula studied me from across 50 feet of tarmac. He burst out laughing. Hesitantly, his troops followed his example, except for the Germani, who rarely laughed. Commodus shifted in his golden armour. "Excuse me, could someone caption this scene for me? What's going on?" Only then did I realise Commodus's eyesight had not recovered as well as he'd hoped. Probably, I thought, with bitter satisfaction, my blinding flash of divine radiance at the way station had left him able to see a little bit in full daylight, but not at all at night. A small blessing, if I could figure out how to use it. "I wish I could describe it," Caligula said dryly. "The mighty god Apollo has come to the rescue, and he's never looked better." "That was sarcasm?" Commodus asked. "Does he look horrible?" "Yes," Caligula said. "Ha!" Commodus forced a laugh. "Ha, Apollo, you look horrible." My hands trembling, I knocked an arrow and fired it at Caligula's face. My aim was true, but Caligula swatted aside the projectile like it was a sleepy horsefly. "Don't embarrass yourself, Lester," he said. "Let the leaders talk." He turned his grimacing face towards the Kodiak bear. "Well, Frank Zhang, you have a chance to surrender with honour. Bow to your emperor." "Emperors?" Commodus corrected. "Yes, of course," Caligula said smoothly. "Praetor Zhang, you are duty-bound to recognise Roman authority, and we are it. Together we can rebuild the camp and raise your legion to glory. No more hiding, no more cowering behind Terminus's weak boundaries. It is time to be true Romans and conquer the world. Join us. Learn from Jason Grace's mistake." I howled again. This time I launched an arrow at Commodus. Yes, it was petty. I thought I could hit a blind emperor more easily, but he too swatted the arrow away. "Cheap shot, Apollo," he yelled. "There's nothing wrong with my hearing or my reflexes." The Kodiak bear bellowed. With one claw he broke the arrow shafts on his shoulder. He shrank, changing into Frank Zhang, the arrow stubs piercing his breastplate at the shoulder. He lost his helmet. The side of his body was soaked in blood, but his expression was pure determination. Next to him, Hannibal trumpeted and pawed the ground, ready to change and charge. "Nobody!" Frank glanced at his last dozen comrades, weary and wounded but still ready to follow him to the death. "Enough blood has been shed." Caligula inclined his head in agreement. So you yield, then? Oh, no, Frank threatened, and straightened, though the effort made him wince. I have an alternative solution. Spolia opima. Nervous murmurs rippled through the emperor's columns. Some of the Germani raised their bushy eyebrows. A few of Frank's legionnaires looked like they wanted to say something. Are you crazy, for instance? But they held their tongues. Commodus laughed. He pulled off his helmet, revealing his shaggy curls and beard, his cruel, handsome face. His gaze was milky and unfocused, the skin around his eyes still pitted, as if he'd been splashed with acid. Single combat, he grinned. I love this idea. I'll take you both, Frank offered. You and Caligula against me. You win and make it through the tunnel, the camp is yours. Commodus rubbed his hands. Glorious! Wait, Caligula snapped. He removed his own helmet. He did not look delighted. His eyes glittered, his mind no doubt racing as he thought over all the angles. This is too good to be true. What are you playing at, Zhang? Either I kill you, or I die, Frank said. That's all. Get through me, and you can march right into camp. I'll order my remaining troops to stand down. You can have your triumphal parade through New Rome like you've always wanted. Frank turned to one of his comrades. You hear that, Callum? Those are my orders. If I die, you will make sure they're honoured. Callum opened his mouth, but apparently didn't trust himself to speak. He just nodded dourly. Caligula frowned. Spolia opima. It's so primitive. It hasn't been done since... He stopped himself, perhaps remembering the kind of troops he had at his back. Primitive Germani, who viewed single combat as the most honourable way for a leader to win a battle. In earlier times, Romans had felt the same way. The first king, Romulus, had personally defeated an enemy king, Acron, stripping him of his armour and weapons. For centuries after, Roman generals tried to emulate Romulus, going out of their way to find enemy leaders on the battlefield for single combat, so they could claim spolia opima. It was the ultimate display of courage for any true Roman. Frank's ploy was clever. The emperors couldn't refuse his challenge without losing face in front of their troops. On the other hand, Frank was badly wounded. He couldn't possibly win without help. 2 against 2? I yelped, surprising even myself. I'll fight. That got another round of laughter from the emperor's troops. Commodus said, even better. Frank looked horror-stricken, which wasn't the sort of thank you I'd been hoping for. Apollo, no, he said. I can handle this. Clear off. A few months ago, I would have been happy to let Frank take this hopeless fight on his own while I sat back, ate chilled grapes and checked my messages. Not now. Not after Jason Grace. I glanced at the poor, maimed Pegasi chained at the Emperor's chariot, and I decided I couldn't live in a world where cruelty like that went unchallenged. Sorry, Frank, I said. You won't face this alone. I looked at Caligula. Well, baby beauties, your colleague Emperor has already agreed. Are you in, or do we terrify you too much? Caligula's nostrils flared. We have lived for thousands of years, he said, as if explaining a simple fact to a slow student. We are gods. And I'm the son of Mars, Frank countered, praetor of the 12th Legion, Fulminata. I'm not afraid to die. Are you? The Emperor stayed silent for a count of 5. Finally, Caligula called over his shoulder, Gregorix! One of the Germani jogged forward. With his massive height and weight, his shaggy hair and beard and his thick hide armour, he looked like Frank in Kodiak bear form, only with an uglier face. Lord, he grunted, the troops are to stay where they are, Caligula ordered. No interference while Commodus and I kill Praetor Zhang and his pet god, understood? Gregorix studied me. I could imagine him silently wrestling with his ideas of honour. Single combat was good. Single combat against a wounded warrior and a zombie-infected weakling, however, was not much of a victory. The smart thing would be to slaughter all of us and march on into the camp. But a challenge had been issued. Challenges had to be accepted. But his job was to protect the emperors, and if this was some sort of trap. I bet Gregorix was wishing he'd pursued that business degree his mum always wanted him to get. Being a barbarian bodyguard was mentally exhausting. Very well, my lord, he said. Frank faced his remaining troops. Get out of here. Find Hazel. Defend the city from Tarquin. Hannibal trumpeted in protest. You too, buddy, Frank said. No elephants are going to die today. Hannibal huffed. The demigods obviously didn't like it either, but they were Roman legionnaires, too well trained to disobey a direct order. They retreated into the tunnel with the elephant and the legion standard, leaving only Frank Zhang and me on the team Camp Jupiter. While the emperors climbed down from their chariot, Frank turned to me and wrapped me in a sweaty, bloody embrace. I'd always figured him for a hugger, so this didn't surprise me until he whispered in my ear, You're interfering with my plan. When I say time's up, I don't care where you are or how the fight is going. I want you to run away from me as fast as you can. That's an order. He clapped me on my back and let me go. I wanted to protest. You're not the boss of me. I hadn't come here to run away on command. I could do that quite well on my own. I certainly wasn't going to allow another friend to sacrifice himself for my sake. On the other hand, I didn't know Frank's plan. I'd have to wait and see what he had in mind. Then I could decide what to do. Besides, if we stood any chance of winning a death match against Commodus and Caligula, it wouldn't be on account of our superior strength and charming personalities. We needed some serious industrial strength cheating. The emperors strode towards us across the scorched and buckled tarmac. Up close, their armour was even more hideous. Caligula's breastplate looked like it had been coated with glue, then rolled through the display cases at Tiffany & Co. Well, he gave us a smile as bright and cold as his jewel collection. Shall we? Commodus took off his gauntlets. His hands were huge and rough, calloused as if he'd been punching brick walls in his spare time. It was hard to believe I had ever held those hands with affection. Caligula, you take Zang, he said. I'll take Apollo. I don't need my eyesight to find him. I'll just follow my ears. He'll be the one whimpering. I hated that he knew me so well. Frank drew his sword. Blood still oozed from his shoulder wounds. I wasn't sure how he planned to remain standing, much less do battle. His other hand brushed the cloth pouch that held his piece of firewood. So, we're clear on the rules, he said. There aren't any. We kill you. You die. Then he gestured at the emperors. Come and get it.